Professional butchers have been quietly keeping certain cuts off the display case for generations, not because they're inferior, but because they're so good they'd rather take them home themselves. Today, that changes. We're pulling back the curtain on the cuts that live behind the counter, the ones your butcher wraps up at the end of their shift and never once mentions to you. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to ask for, why these cuts outperform ribeye in almost every category, and there's one cut toward the end that I genuinely believe is the single best piece of beef you can put on a grill, and most people have never heard its name. Let's start with the economics of a carcass, because this is where the whole secret begins. When a whole beef comes into a butcher shop, roughly a third of it gets broken into the glamour cuts, your ribeyes, your strips, your tenderloins. Those get front-lit in the display case because that's what people recognize. They sell fast, they sell at premium prices, and the whole retail model is built around them. But the other two-thirds of that animal, that's where things get interesting. There are muscles buried in the shoulder, the chest, and along the spine that most supermarket customers never ask about because they don't know they exist. And here's the thing that the best butchers figured out a long time ago. Flavor lives in the muscles that work hardest. Fat and connective tissue in those hard-working cuts equals depth, richness, and complexity that a tenderloin simply cannot compete with. So, first cut, the flat iron. This comes from the shoulder, specifically the top blade muscle, and for years it was considered too tough to sell as a steak because of a thick seam of connective tissue running through the center. Butchers knew to slice around it. Once you do, what's left is a cut with marbling that rivals ribeye, a deep, beefy flavor, and a tenderness that genuinely surprises people the first time they cook it. The USDA actually conducted a formal tenderness study on beef muscles, and the flat iron ranked as the second most tender cut on the entire animal, right behind the tenderloin. Second most tender, out of over 35 muscles tested. And it costs less than half the price of a ribeye per pound at most butcher counters. Now here's an open loop I want you to hold on to. Why did it take until the early 2000s for chefs to even start using this cut? The answer involves a university research project and a Midwestern meat scientist, and it's stranger than you'd think. We'll come back to that. Next up, the hanger steak. If you've eaten at any serious steak restaurant in Paris, you've had this. It's the bavette de flancher, and French butchers have been hoarding it for literally centuries. There is exactly one hanger steak per animal. One.
It hangs, hence the name, from the diaphragm near the last rib, and it has a deep, almost mineral, organ-adjacent richness that no other steak can replicate. Grill it hot, slice it thin against the grain, and it has this yielding, almost silky texture with a flavor that punches you right in the face in the best possible way. For years, American butchers called this the butcher's tenderloin, the cut they kept for themselves. It never showed up in grocery stores because the supply was too small to justify the display case space. Today, you can find it if you ask directly, but plenty of shops still don't stock it out front. Ask for it by name. If your butcher has it, watch their face. There's usually a flicker of surprise that you even know what it is. Now, that university research project I mentioned. In the late 1990s, beef consumption in the United States was declining. The industry needed new cuts to reinvigorate consumer interest. Meat scientists at the University of Nebraska and the University of Florida launched a funded study to map the tenderness of every major muscle in the beef carcass. They tested over 5,600 muscles across hundreds of carcasses. The result? They discovered what butchers already knew intuitively, that cuts like the flat iron and the Vegas strip were sitting in overlooked parts of the animal, tender and flavorful, just waiting to be formally recognized and named. That study changed the American retail beef landscape. It's one of the most quietly influential food science projects of the last 30 years. Which brings us to our next cut, and this one is relatively new to the market, the Denver steak. It comes from the chuck, the shoulder region, specifically the serratus ventralis muscle, which is one of the least exercised muscles in that area. It's heavily marbled, it has a rich, beefy depth, and when you reverse sear it or cook it over high charcoal heat to medium rare, you get a crust that crackles and an interior that's almost buttery. Butchers at whole animal shops have known about this muscle forever. It only got a retail name and started appearing in specialty markets around 2009. Here's your butcher's secret for this one. The Denver steak benefits massively from a simple overnight dry brine, just kosher salt on a wire rack in the fridge, uncovered.
The salt draws out surface moisture, then reabsorbs back into the meat, seasoning it from within and creating a dry surface that gives you a restaurant-quality sear at home. Don't skip that step. Now we're getting into the cuts that really escalate things. The tri-tip. This is a California story. The tri-tip is a triangular muscle cut from the bottom sirloin, and for decades, outside of Santa Maria, California, most of the country had never seen it as a standalone steak. Everywhere else, it got ground into hamburger. Ground into hamburger, meat with this much flavor and marbling just disappearing into a patty.
Santa Maria pitmasters figured out in the 1950s that if you grill this thing whole over red oak, let it rest properly, and slice it thin across the grain, you get something transcendent. Smoky, beefy, with a tender chew that has actual substance to it, unlike a tenderloin that just dissolves. It took another 50 years for the rest of the country to catch on. And now, the one I promised you. The one that I genuinely believe is the single best piece of beef most people have never cooked. The teres major. Also called the shoulder tender or petite tender. This is a small, torpedo-shaped muscle from the chuck that is, I need you to hear this, more tender than a filet mignon, measurably. In blind tenderness tests, tasters consistently rate it at or above the tenderloin. It has more flavor than a filet because of its location and the light intramuscular fat threaded through it, and because it's small, irregular in shape, and requires a skilled hand to remove cleanly from the carcass. Most large-scale processors skip it entirely. It goes to grind. A cut more tender than filet mignon sent to hamburger because it's inconvenient to butcher at scale. Your local whole animal butcher almost certainly has access to this. Call ahead, ask specifically for the teres major or petite tender, and prepare yourself. Sear it hard in cast iron with butter, garlic, and thyme. Cook it to 130 degrees internal. Rest it for 8 minutes. Slice it on the bias. What you'll taste is everything a filet mignon promises and rarely delivers, except with actual depth of flavor. The story here isn't that your butcher is hiding cuts out of selfishness. The real story is that our retail system was built around a handful of famous names, and everything else got sorted into secondary categories by default, not by merit. The cuts we talked about today weren't kept secret because they weren't good enough. They were kept secret because the system never made space for them. Now you know where to look. So here's what I want from you. Drop in the comments, have you ever cooked any of these cuts? Flat iron, hanger, Denver, tri-tip, teres major? Tell me which one you've had and which one you're most curious to try. I read every single comment. If this video changed how you think about your butcher counter, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who deserve to eat better. Subscribe so you never miss a video, and next time we are going deep on dry aging at home, and the results are going to shock you.